Thanks for listening to the Zain Battla podcast. We officially have merch, and right now 100% of the profits are going to PCRF, Palestine Children's Relief Fund. We got hoodies, we got t-shirts, and again, 100% of the profits going right to PCRF. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I want to thank you for supporting my work. Qasim Rashid, thank you for coming to the podcast today. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's good to be here, Zain.
Would love to hear about what you're running for, why you're running, what are you hoping to achieve?
Running for U.S. Congress here in the 11th District of Illinois. And it's a long time coming. It's not my first run for Congress. I ran once before. And this one is different for a number of reasons we'll get into. But fundamentally, it comes down to a couple of key issues. One, I'm an immigrant to this country. We immigrated here from Pakistan at a very young age. And we grew up in a pretty low-income environment. I mean, I spent most of my 90s in Section 8 housing, food stamps. I've been working since I was 15. And so I've seen the economic struggle that tens of millions of people go through on a daily basis. And when you look at just the levels of wealth and income inequality, it's worse now than it was 30 years ago. People can't afford groceries. They can't afford gas in their car. They can't afford rent. It's gotten out of hand. I was fortunate enough to get into a great law school and work in human rights law. And part of that, by the way, was working actually on corporate litigation, bank regulation to make sure that banks weren't exploiting consumers. But the majority of my career has been in human rights law. And so I think part of my life experience that's defining my run for Congress is having lived in the economic trenches for 15 years, having then worked with those same communities after being able to do well for myself the last 15 years, as an advocate. Now it's about transforming that advocacy into policy. It's about ensuring that when we talk about making sure people have enough food to eat, have enough gas in their car, have enough to pay rent, it's not just talking about it, but how do we build better policies to make that happen? And then finally, representation. There's never been a Pakistani-American in U.S. history elected to Congress. I would be the first one if we can win this primary and then the general. But I think a combination of having lived in the trenches and now wanting to ensure we have better policy, plus the importance of representation in the halls of Congress is driving my motivation to run.
Yeah, representation is always important. I mean, we're starting to get more and more Muslims in Congress. We have Muslims that are currently running for Congress. Yeah. So I think it's important that whatever the representation is, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Pakistani, whether it's Black, Asian, whatever the representation is, we always get the representation. When it comes to the human rights aspect, you would think that the worlds of human rights and political office kind of mesh together, but I think a lot of people continue to have concerns on where our current elected officials lie in the realm of human rights. So where have you seen that kind of crossover, and where do you currently see it now of challenging your opponent right now? Where does he lie in the realm of human rights, and why do you think that you're the person to unseat him?
His record on human rights is, in a word, atrocious. And I'm not just talking about his refusal to call for a ceasefire and release of hostages in Gaza right now. It goes far beyond that. This is a man who to this day won't even sign on to H.R. 40. It's a bill to study reparations. Even studying reparations is a bridge too far for him. There's a man who, when the Supreme Court overturned affirmative action, didn't think it was important enough to comment on it. This is a person who, when the George W. Bush Patriot Act came up to extend warrantless searches on U.S. citizens, proudly voted for more warrantless searches on U.S. citizens. And we know this disproportionately targets people who look like us. Asians, Muslims, South Asians, Arabs, Black people, immigrants, Latinos. It's a horrifically discriminatory piece of legislation that he proudly voted for. This is a person who, when H.R. 620 came up, this was a bill to strip down disability rights. Because if there's one group that has too much power in this country, it's disabled people, he voted we should strip down disability rights. And so to me, it's no surprise that he's this pro-war, corporate-funded, multi-millionaire politician who's been around for nearly 2 decades, and he's bent on more war in places like Gaza. He's never once called for an end to the occupation or an end to the settlements or an end to the blockade. He won't even sign on to H.R. 3103, which is Congresswoman Betty McCollum's bill that says, hey, our tax dollars should not be used to arrest and detain Palestinian children. let alone keep them in there indefinitely, which is what's happening right now. So his record is atrocious. My record, since the time I've been working in human rights law for about almost 15 years now, supporting survivors of domestic and sexual violence, working on expanding healthcare and education access, training law enforcement on Fourth Amendment right to privacy protections, working on ensuring that there is adequate cleanup after disasters happen, and on an international scale, combating Uyghur genocide, combating Rohingya genocide, fundraising for victims of the Rohingya genocide, working on ending the bombing of Yemen. I'm on a nonprofit a board of a nonprofit called Common Defense, working to end the occupation in Palestine, end the arms trade that is enabling the ongoing bombing. And this is work that I've done, again, proudly and consistently. So I'm proud of my record. And he and I just had a debate a couple days ago. He finally showed up to one. And his whole attack line on me was to delegitimize whether I'm an actual lawyer or not. No questions on policy, no questions on principles that we're fighting for, just a smear campaign. Which, when slander becomes a tool in a debate, the argument is lost. He knows the argument is lost, but that's why it's so critical for us to just be outspoken, to be present, and then let our actions do the talking.
Absolutely, and I think his actions also did the talking too, because I actually watched one of your debates with him, because there was one that was online and then there was one in person. The one in person, I was actually shocked because the first question that was asked was, do you accept money from special interests and super PACs? And he just completely dodged answering the question. He may have mentioned a little bit that, yeah, I did accept banking money, but I used it for the right reasons. And what is the right reason when you're accepting money from a special interest?
Right.
And then one of my favorite parts that you did for this question and the next question was you said, can you repeat the question? Because he didn't answer the question.
Right.
The second question was, should Israel be held accountable for killing Gaza journalists? And he started talking about Iran and Ukraine.
And nuclear war,
Yeah, and he just completely dodged the question. You answered the question, and then he left. And I was just mind blown that, wow, are people actually going to line up to the polls and vote for this guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why he's won in the past is because the Democrats who've challenged him have all had great ideas, but never had the financial resources or the team, the built-out team, to effectively get the message out there. There were strong Democrats who challenged him in the past. And then the Republicans who've challenged him, it's a deep blue district. And so as bad as he is, at least he's not a Republican. And call me old-fashioned, but I just don't think that's a very high bar, right? That at least your guy isn't the other guy is just not a great bar. And even that debate that he showed up to, he had declined to attend, showed up unannounced last minute, and then abruptly got up and said, I have somewhere else I need to be. And so to your point, the reason why I asked the moderator to repeat the question is because I needed the audience to remember that he actually didn't answer the question. He refused to answer the question. And the point that I was bringing up on the corporate money side is that whoever funds your campaign is who you're going to be accountable to at the end of the day. If you're writing my paycheck, Zain, why would I speak out against you? Ever. I mean, you're paying my mortgage. You're putting my kids through college. I'm not going to speak out against you. And that's exactly what Bill Foster is doing. He voted for Dodd-Frank regulation back in 2008. Then he took absurd amounts of banking money. And then in 2018, under Trump, he voted to deregulate Dodd-Frank, right? He voted for the ACA in 2009. And then he took absurd amounts of healthcare money, nearly $1 million. And then in 2013, 2014, and 2015, he voted with Tea Party Republicans to repeal significant parts of the ACA. He voted for climate justice initiatives in 2009, and then he's taken, I think, nearly $100,000 in Exxon and fossil fuel money. And now he's pro-drilling, pro-fracking, pro the debunked science of carbon capture, and wants to wait till 2050 for carbon neutrality, even though scientists are telling us we have until 2030. So it's a bribe by any other name. And the fact that he doesn't see it is, I think, a reflection of how out of touch he is with reality. But I have faith in the American people, and I don't just mean Democrats. As divided as our country is, 95% of Democrats and Republicans are united that we got to get corporate money out of politics. It's corrupting, it's wrong, it's immoral, it's unethical. He doesn't care. My opponent doesn't care. The American people do, and I hope that they vote for me as a result of that.
Yeah, and we hope to see more people like you in office. When it comes to the people that you want to represent, what are some of the things that you've seen very strong in the Naperville community, and what are areas that you're the people that you're trying to represent, what are they concerned with that when you get into office you can directly address those issues?
Our campaign is focused on three pillars: economic justice, social justice, and climate justice. And this really well reflects the District 11 of Illinois, which includes Bolingbrook, Naperville, Aurora, goes all the way up to Belvedere, and all the way up to McHenry County, near the Wisconsin border. So it's a pretty vast district. But what we're finding is that these pillars really align well. Throughout the district, people want economic justice. Housing is absurdly unaffordable right now. We have an incumbent who sits on the House Financial Services Oversight Committee to conduct oversight over the National Association of Realtors to make sure they're not exploiting people. Meanwhile, not only is he not doing his job, but the NAR has just been fined $1.8 billion for exploiting home sellers and therefore home buyers. And far from holding them accountable, he's taking $80,000 in campaign contributions from them. So people care about the economic justice aspect of it. They care about the social justice aspect of it, right? The rising hate crimes against Muslims, against Jews, against LGBTQ Americans. Being able to speak to these issues as a human rights lawyer, people care about that stuff. Healthcare is a major issue, right? I mean, we're talking about a country right now, we're the most financially wealthy country in the world, but we still don't have guaranteed universal healthcare. And we're spending double per capita of every country that does. We have the lowest life expectancy, highest maternal mortality, highest infant mortality. 70,000 Americans a year die waiting for health care because they can't afford it. 500,000 go through medical bankruptcy. And my opponent, far from supporting universal health care, has voted to repeal even the ACA and is taking money from corporations like United Health, who right now are being sued for denying health care. So like his whole re-election depends on people being denied health care. It's absurd. And then finally on the climate justice aspect of it, right? Especially in the rural parts. But also I think even conservatives. I mean, conservatives are often conservationists too, So they don't even need to be Democrats, and we're getting support from people on the right because the climate crisis is here. We saw last summer the sky was orange. It was like Armageddon. You couldn't even see the sun because of the Canadian wildfires and the smoke, caused by that. And my opponent is a guy who's taking Exxon money, promoting fracking, which poisons our water and causes earthquakes, promotes drilling, which is just absurd to me, it's insane to me. And he doesn't see the urgency of any of it. And so as we're making these contrasts, I was at Mateo Valley High School last night, making these contrasts. These are kids, 16, 17, and 18-year-old kids. And they're like, yeah, that's obvious. Why would we vote for a guy who does that? Why would we vote for a guy who's gonna wait until we're 50 before he takes the climate crisis seriously? We need to act now. I'm like, thank you. Yeah, and so it's a message that's resonating really well.
And I'm glad the message is resonating well. Obviously, climate crisis is one big thing. There's only so much time for action to not even reverse the effects at this point, to just pause how bad it's gotten.
Yes.
And then other issues that you've brought up, healthcare, housing. I mean, these are the forefront of most people's mind, regardless of if they're Democrat or Republican.
Exactly right.
But when you're controlled by special interests and money, it just skews, as you said, who you're loyal to. Yeah. If you're giving me my paycheck, I'm not going to speak out against you.
That's it. It's why our campaign is 100% people funded. It's why we don't take any corporate money whatsoever. We're nearing $1 million that we've raised for our campaign through complete small dollar donation. I think we've had 12 or 13,000 unique donations to our campaign. And I think people get it. I think they see the power of knowing that when my congressperson will make a vote in Congress, that vote will only focus on whether it helps working people or not. I had some lobbyists from Chase Bank call me and say, hey, we just want to have a conversation with you. I'm like, sure, we can have a conversation, but I'm not taking any of your money. And they said, well, no, the money's a formality. And I said, okay, well, you can formally keep it because I don't want it. And they canceled the meeting, right? I mean, it's like these corporations are not altruistic companies, right? They're not altruistic organizations looking out for our best interests. They're looking to make a buck. And if they got to poison your water or your air or deny you health care or deny you basic civil rights to make that buck, they'll do it. The problem is politicians who are okay with that. Politicians like my opponent who are okay with that. That's what we gotta get out of Congress. That's what we gotta get out of the system. I always say it's not a broken system. It was built this way. And that's the scary part. Because when something's broken, if I knock this mug over and I break it, I wasn't meaning to do that, right? But if the mug didn't have a handle on it, well, then it's just a bad system. Let's just build a better system in the first place. And that's my whole point here, that we can't get disheartened despite how much there is to be disheartened about. But if we can collaborate and build that better system, sure, it won't be fixed overnight or it won't be improved overnight, but we can build a coalition to get to a point where maybe in 4 years, maybe in 8 years, we're able to alleviate some of the suffering. But it has to start now. We can't wait any longer.
We definitely can't wait any longer. And I think when it comes to your community in particular, the Naperville community, or it's outside of Naperville too, or is it just
no? It's a massive district. It starts in Lamont and Romeoville, covers Bolingbrook, Woodridge, Lisle, Naperville, Aurora, Batavia, St. Charles, Geneva, Woodstock. I mean, it goes all the way up to Belvedere and all the way up to Volo and Wakanda. There's a Wakanda, Illinois. I don't know if people know that. Yeah.
I was just like, maybe it was one of those things when people say an analogy like, oh yeah, it's in Narnia.
No.
Very far away. There's actually a Wakanda.
Literally a Wakanda, Illinois, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Wakanda forever.
That's right.
For you.
That's right.
So I was going to mention that obviously the dynamic in politics are slowly changing a little bit. People are waking up and realizing, I think one of the main issues that people are waking up and realizing too is the atrocities happening in Palestine. Yeah. But obviously that issue is making people realize that, oh, this is directly caused by people we have in office. Yeah. And this also leads down to every single issue, whether it's healthcare, housing, sure. Education. What transformation have you seen maybe firsthand from people that you've been mobilizing to help others get out the vote, or I'm sure there's an element of phone banking. Have you seen an increase of involvement in political activity from your community since you started running?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And what I'll add is if you're listening or watching this and you want to get involved, then go to my website, QasimRashid.com, and sign up to volunteer, because we need all hands on deck, especially right now. Our campaign slogan is "Justice Can't Wait." And that was very deliberately and meticulously chosen because when we talk about what's happening in Palestine right now, we can't tell folks in Palestine, hey, wait another couple of months and then we'll figure it out. We need to get them support and safety and aid and food and shelter now. When you talk about, my daughter has an autoimmune disease, and it's a disease that has no cure for it, and the doctors have had the very tough conversation that if we can't find the medication, she's not going to make it. We've been spending over $1,000 a month for the last 2.5 years because the insurance company won't cover the medication. Nobody should have to pay that. No parent should have to pay that. The fact that I can afford it is irrelevant to the fact that it's completely unjust. And what's worse is we just got the blood test back for last month. This medication is no longer effective. The new medication that is a standard of care. This is not experimental, it's not theoretical, it's the standard of care medication that she needs. 6 doses a year, $40,000 a dose. Wow. Insurance company's not covering it. I can't go to her and be like, sweetheart, I know you're only 8 years old, but go get a job, go figure it out. Right? Justice can't wait for her. I mentioned the climate crisis and how the air was such a toxic quality last summer. My middle child, Hashim, he's asthmatic. We had to keep him locked inside the house because if we put him outside, we might as well go straight to the ER because that's how bad it is. I can't go to him and be like, hey kiddo, just wait until 2050 for us to get to carbon neutral and then you can start to breathe again, right? Justice can't wait. And so this is the message that I think people are resonating with. They are realizing that the status quo is great if you're a wealthy white male worth $20 million and has never had to struggle a little bit in your entire life due to your immutable characteristics. But for the rest of society, for women, for people of color, for immigrants, for Black Americans, for Indigenous Americans, it's for low-income people, regardless of color, it's not that simple. And we can't sit here and pontificate with the arrogance of incrementalism is what I call it. We cannot tolerate the arrogance of incrementalism. We need the courage of comprehensive and bold movement towards justice. Justice can't wait because it is literally a matter of life and death. And I think that's the message resonating. We're having a lot of fun knocking doors. We're knocking about 10,000 doors a week right now. We are making about 50,000 phone calls a week, sending out about 50 to 60,000 text messages a week. But it's not enough. We got to double all that stuff. So if you're looking to get involved and make history, then reach out and let's get to work.
When it comes to politics in general, of course, I know and understand that politics can be pretty dirty. There's been tactics done by people within the establishment. Whenever there's progressive candidates trying to make a change, they try to pick up some low-hanging fruit and try to really attack their opponent, mostly out of fear that, oh, am I actually going to lose to this nobody, essentially, because I've been in this high chair for so long. But I guess what tactics have you seen from not just your opponent, but maybe other super PACs and other special interests that are aware that your campaign exists and know that your platform will essentially hurt their chances of, still having the politicians in their back pocket?
What I'm excited about regarding the attacks is that none of them are on policy. None of them are on principles or values, because they know that when I talk about universal health care, it's extremely popular, it's moral, it's right, it's economically smart. When I talk about a ceasefire and release of hostages and end to the occupation, end to the settlements, they know it's the right and moral thing to do, and they can't attack me on that. When I talk about reparations or student loan cancellation, when I talk about regulating banks and making housing affordable, building 7 million new publicly subsidized homes to address the housing crisis, they can't attack me on this stuff because they know people want this stuff and they know we can afford it. It's just a matter of their arrogance and cruelty, the arrogance of incrementalism that's preventing it from happening. So what they're attacking me on is, oh, he lived in Virginia for a decade, or oh, he hasn't litigated in court as much as we think he should have litigated to be a real human rights lawyer. It tells me they don't actually know what a human rights lawyer does. There has been 0 attacks on the actual policies that I put forth. And every single one has been fear-mongering, misinformation, misdirection. And it feels pretty good because it shows that
you're doing something right.
I'm doing something right. And they're not able to grapple with how to tackle me. And it helps that I've got a modest social media platform and communications platform, because they know that if you do come out with a nasty attack that's false, I can clap back and make people, or make them pay in front of people the consequences of lying by holding them accountable to their lies. So, we had this Daily Herald forum a couple of days ago, and right in the middle, he makes a comment to the effect of, well, you were disgraced in Virginia. And I'm like, he might as well have called me an alien from the planet Zortan, because what are you talking about? It's literally just a complete fabrication. And so that tells me that he's frightened, he's scared, but it also tells me what his level of integrity and character is in this space. Because if you need to resort to slander, it's projection. It says more about you than somebody else.
It's pretty hard to completely mind read and understand someone's intentions, but do you think that whether it's Bill Foster, whether it's another corporate Democrat or even Republicans, do you think they genuinely believe the policies that they're advocating for, or do you think that it is solely because of who's funding their campaign?
James Baldwin was asked this question, a hero of mine, and this is in Jim Crow America, or maybe just post Jim Crow. I can't remember exactly when the interview was, but it's 60s, 70s. And he says, I don't know what is in the majority of white people's minds. I can't read their minds. I only know the end result of their actions. He goes, I don't know if the housing lobby is racist, but I know that they'll keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the school board is racist, but I see the textbooks I give my children versus the ones that white children received. I don't know if the labor unions are racist, but I see my job and I see the jobs given to white people. And the point he's trying to make is that whether he believes this stuff or not, whether my opponent Bill Foster believes this stuff or not, it's actually irrelevant. And he's tried to cover himself by saying, let's take the war on Gaza right now. He goes, oh, I'm deeply disappointed in the way Israel. I'm really, really upset. And I'm just, he finger wagged so hard, you think his finger's gonna fall off. I'm really upset with the way they've conducted themselves. It's really unbecoming of a country. Well, okay, then are you going to call for a ceasefire? Well, no, I can't call for a ceasefire. But I'm really upset about it. It's nonsense. And so when people try to do that, I point out that your intentions here are actually irrelevant when your actions are to the contrary. When your actions are causing harm and you know they're causing harm, then just telling me that, but I don't mean to cause harm, doesn't actually solve the problem. If I'm stabbing you but saying, hey, this really hurts me more than it hurts you, it actually makes it even worse. It shows that you are well aware of the harm you're doing. You're well aware of the pain you're causing, of the pain you're inflicting, but you just don't care. And so I think it shows a level of callousness and cruelty that actually makes the situation even worse than someone, and Dr. King talks about this too, right? That when he talks about the letter to a white moderate, and he talks about people who are well-wishing but disingenuous are actually worse than sincere ignorance. Because that disingenuousness it makes you feel better about yourself, but the harm is being inflicted even more. It's even more frustrating for us to have to suffer through.
Right, and I guess where it goes from here is that you try to win the primary, hopefully you win the primary, and then you're facing off against whoever's running for the Republican ticket. So is there fear that if you do beat Bill Foster, then they're going to start pouring money into the Republican candidate? Is there any fear there, or is kind of the focus right now, let's win the primary first and then we'll shift gears?
Well, fear is probably the wrong word. I don't act on fear of any action in this space. What we know is that this is the deep blue seat. Every political rating organization out there has rated this as a solid Democrat seat. That's something that's upsetting Bill Foster, that I'm being public about that. He's trying to paint it as a purple or even a red, right-leaning district. It was 15 years ago, 20 years ago, not anymore. Now it's a solid Democratic district. That's a fact. And so for us, the primary is the determinative election. We win the primary, we're going to win the general. Look, there's three Republicans running on the Republican side for that primary. We'll see who comes out of it. But I'm less worried about a step that hasn't arrived yet. I'm more focused on making sure we win this primary, because this is a deep blue district. And if we do our job and run on the values that we know are winning issues, then we're going to not only win the primary, but we'll win the general as well.
And how long has he been representing this district again? I think
so this is his 8th term. He actually won a district back in 2007 in a special election. And then he lost that to a Republican. So I make the point that the only one of us who's ever lost a Democratic district to a Republican is him. And then after redistricting, they gerrymandered this district. And so then he moved from that district to this district to run here as well. And so again, we talk about projection. He accuses me of carpetbagging from moving back home, but he literally carpetbagged from one district to another to run as well. So this is his 8th term. He's been around almost 16 years now. And I like to point out to voters that in 16 years, he's been the lead sponsor of exactly 0 pieces of legislation that became law. Unless you include post offices, which if that inspires you, good on you. But we send people to Congress to make legislation, not to rename post office.
And I was just going to bring that point up as well, that you not having served in Congress before, sure, you ran for Congress earlier for the seat in Virginia, but now that you're running for the seat in this, which district number is it?
District 11 is where I grew up,
District 11, So since you haven't represented that seat yet, meanwhile Bill Foster has 16 years, 8 terms of time in office, it's like, hey, you passed this legislation that regulated the banks, and then as soon as you started getting bank money, you stopped. Hey, you passed this legislation that regulated big oil, and then you started getting big oil money, and then it's like the money speaks for itself. And even the funniest thing on that debate that I mentioned earlier was his answer to the special interest question was, we have more transparency on what's happening on campaign finance. And I'm like, that's a terrible thing for you, because you probably are trying to hide that where you're getting your money from, but now that it's out you're letting people know it's out in the open, I can just see the receipts and see who's supporting you.
And I think that's one area of unification among Americans. People don't want corporate money in politics. They're sick of it. They realize that it's contrary to the tenets of democracy. Corporations are not people, contrary to what some Republicans claim, and some Democrats too, unfortunately. They're not people. They shouldn't have a say in our elections. So we the people, not we the corporations. And so we're being very clear and deliberate about that conversation, and it's resonating with people. I got a call, I've gotten calls, numerous calls from Republicans who say, hey, are you willing to have a dialogue with us? And my answer is always yes, of course. And my policies are based on science and facts. And if you can show me better data on something, I'm happy to change my policies and views. But it needs to be grounded in facts and principles, not based on which corporation is funding my campaign.
Got it. So getting into office is one step. How do you make sure that once you're in office that you really make an impact? And obviously winning over one seat as a progressive candidate, winning that seat over, it's a great thing. But then there's 434 other faces in the House.
Yeah.
Some of them progressive, but most of them are corporate funded.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that there's pressure in legislation? What's the step forward that's going to drive home results for not just people in your district, but the American people?
Well, I think the first step is making sure you're grounded in your principles and values, and your election is built on justice, not on corporate funding. Because once your foundation is solid, you can build up from there. And we're already doing that. So when we win this, inshallah, it'll be with people funding, it'll be with the knowledge people will have that we're accountable to them. Two, then I think that's where the coalition building comes up. I think one area that we lack is because we don't have representation, we're not able to build an effective coalition of young people, of new leaders coming up as well. And this is where kind of a long-term approach is necessary, and recognizing that it's not about electing just one person, but how do we then build an infrastructure so that in 2026, there's 5 of us running. In 2030, there are 15 of us running. By 2050, there's 100 of us running, right? And so that coalition to me means mentoring young people, getting young people from diverse communities as interns, helping fund local and state candidates, canvassing for them, getting them financial resources, helping them with digital strategy. And then once, as you're building that coalition, you are adamant in pushing the Overton window back in a direction of justice. The Overton window is so far right now that even something as simple as immigration policy, whereas asylum as a human right is on the chopping block to cut off asylum, which is just absurd in my view, in every sense of the word. And so being able to advocate vociferously, courageously, consistently for these values and these policies that we know are grounded in humanity, grounded in facts, grounded in science, grounded in justice, is a critical component. I think so often Democrats will be on their back heel or on their back foot instead of leaning in and leading the charge to say, hey, here is the way to do this. And I think one of the reasons why they are on their back foot is because they're constantly weighing, okay, if I talk about this, am I going to lose this funding? If I talk about this, am I going to lose that coalition of support from some special interest? And that's why I mean your foundation has to be solid. Your vision to build a coalition has to be committed. And then you need to have the confidence and the courage to lean into your messaging and make sure that you're unapologetic about it. And when I talk about being unapologetic, you're not tied to one idea that can never be changed. You're tied to the idea that I'm doing what's best to uphold justice for working people. And if a better solution comes along, you take that better solution. That doesn't make you a hypocrite or contradictory. It means you found a better solution and you can admit, hey, I thought this was the best way to do things. I've got new information now that tells me this is a better way. So now I will take the good from here and build that better path. I think that is the path forward. And that clarity, again, comes from having a solid foundation where you're funded by people as opposed to corporations and special interests.
And these are all things that we would hope for people who represent us. When it comes to the Naperville community, I mean, you've born and raised in Naperville?
No, I was born in Pakistan, and then
born in Pakistan, right.
Yeah, but raised in DuPage County, and then I've been in Naperville for a long time. From a high school teen to a student at North Central College, and now my wife and I live there with our 3 kids who are all in Naperville public schools.
Awesome. What made you move to Virginia, and then what made you move back?
Law school. Went there for law school, got into a great law school program, applied in Illinois. Nobody accepted me in Illinois, unfortunately. But Richmond Law is a phenomenal program, had some phenomenal human rights scholars and professors that I got to study under. And then started working in Virginia. And then after the 2020 election, it was time to move back home and be closer to family. And we're excited to have moved back home. It's good to be back where you grew up as well. So
to, I guess, your opponent's point that, you lived away for 10 years. I guess you can't go law school out of state anymore.
And that's the irony too, because it's the projection and doublespeak. he grew up in Wisconsin, and he constantly talks about how he started a business that's created thousands of jobs. And those are all jobs in Wisconsin, but you'll never hear him say Wisconsin. He always says the Midwest. So he's very coy about his own verbiage because he knows that if he leans into his youth and his childhood and his business and all of this stuff in Wisconsin, it'll make him a hypocrite to criticize me for spending some time in Virginia. He spent more time in Wisconsin than I spent in Virginia, but that's somehow okay. But Virginia for higher education is somehow not. And that's my point, that I don't care that he was born in Wisconsin. I don't care that his business is in Wisconsin, not Illinois. Good for him. Whether that's true or not, and it is true, but whether it's true or not has no bearing on whether people in the 11th district can pay rent or whether people here can afford to buy groceries or whether they can afford their health care. And my whole point to Bill Foster has been, let's stop with the culture wars and this nonsensical stuff of who's authentically here or not, and let's talk about the actual policies. And that's what he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to talk about how he voted to deregulate banks after taking banking money. He doesn't want to talk about how he voted to strip down the Americans with Disabilities Act after taking big box retailer money. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he voted with Tea Party Republicans to pass legislation that would have charged women more for health care than men, that would have excluded people with pre-existing conditions from getting insurance in the first place, that would have charged more for senior citizens. He doesn't want to talk about that stuff. And so he engages in these culture wars and these character assassinations. I think it's petty. I think it's unbecoming of a public servant. And frankly, I think the American people are sick of it.
It seems like you have quite a bit going on, and it's all within the human rights space. What continues to keep you motivated, and what kind of drives you to go the route of advocating for human rights? Because many people within the law space, they'll go the corporate law route, but you're doing the complete opposite of standing up for human rights and the people that you want to represent.
Did and am still doing right now. I think my first job in human rights law was at the Virginia Poverty Law Center, their Office of Domestic and Sexual Violence. I worked as an intern under an attorney and started taking DV cases, women who are survivors, working with them on asylum, on refugee, on visa self petitions to get access and documented status here. That's work I do to this day. Supporting DV survivors is work that I do to this day. In addition to that, I worked extensively in the prison system, working with incarcerated citizens, working on prison reform issues, working with nonprofits who are helping transition formerly incarcerated people back into public life. I've worked with Humanity First, a nonprofit organization that works on disaster relief. My first deployment with them actually was before law school. It was in 2005 in Katrina, when Hurricane Katrina hit. I went down to Louisiana for about 2 weeks to provide support to Katrina victims. I've since raised $350,000 for the Pakistan floods a couple years ago. I was in Turkey last year at this time after the earthquake. I arrived there shortly after the earthquake, raised a little over $100,000 for Turkey earthquake victims. I'm proud of the fact that we established a soup kitchen in Turkey that fed 1.4 million people hot meals. 1.4 million hot meals to people, multiple meals per person. I was in Hawaii last summer after the fires to provide pro bono legal aid to fire victims. I've also worked for women's rights firms, especially to combat the discriminatory Muslim ban. But I think the case that I'm most proud of right now, I've been working on this case for about 3 years. A Black and Indigenous Christian community in Prince William County in Virginia reached out to me because their ancestral cemetery was sold on a tax sale to a wealthy land developer. Now, you can't sell cemeteries. You can't charge them taxes because cemeteries, by definition, are exempt from taxes. Yeah. The county messed up. Their attorney, whose one job was to record the property correctly, didn't, and the property was sold. We engaged the landowner and made sure they knew this is the cemetery, it's ancestral, it's sacred. It was built back during the Civil War at a time when Black and Indigenous Americans couldn't be buried with white people, so they were forced to have their own cemeteries. They were denied the basic humanity of being buried with dignity. They were denied death certificates because they were considered subhuman. And so we let them know that, hey, we have a clear documented chain going all the way back 150 years. Do not touch the cemetery. What do? They destroy the cemetery. And so we have filed a lawsuit alleging racial discrimination, demanding restitution for the destruction of the cemetery. Now, this to me is really kind of a microcosm of the United States history. You got black and indigenous people who were denied their humanity when they were buried, when they were killed. And now, 100 and some years later, they're denied their humanity once more. Because the argument is, well, if these were real cemeteries, where are the death certificates? Ignoring that the death certificates were denied to them because they weren't considered real human beings in the first place. So it's a circular argument. That's the case I've worked on for nearly 3 years now. It's still ongoing. We'll be going to litigation this summer. And I'm very much looking forward to getting justice for this community.
Well, Qasim, I really appreciate having you on. It was a great conversation. Are there any closing remarks you want to leave for the audience?
I think, one, thank you for the platform and for the dialogue. I just want to emphasize the urgency of now. We have a unique opportunity to make history and to open a door that's never been opened before, a door of representation, a door of demonstrating that you can run a people-funded campaign and win against a multi-millionaire incumbent funded by billion-dollar donors. We can prove that running on these issues of universal health care, of true climate justice, of economic justice are winning issues. We can prove early in the year, because our election is coming up March 19th, we can prove early in the year, before we get into the full swing of the 24 elections, that running on a ceasefire and release of hostages is a winning issue. So this is not just about me and my campaign. We can set a tone for the whole country and demonstrate that these issues of justice matter. The voices of American Muslims matter, and that we are a profound voting bloc, we are the fabric of this society, and that we cannot and should not be ignored or denied. And my ask of folks is that if you are angry about what's happening in Gaza, if you're angry about the unaffordability, about the lack of healthcare access, channel that anger, embrace that anger, and get it to work for you. Join our campaign, volunteer, door knock, donate if you can, phone bank, text bank, skywrite, whatever your magical power is. Do something, channel it into action, because that's how we bring about meaningful change, meaningful justice, and meaningful representation, so that we can get progress now and ensure that better future for our children domestically and abroad.
Qasim, I really appreciate having you on.
Pleasure to be here,
Thank you so
buddy.
much.
All right.